Kathleen's got it.
Kathleen, well, she's not close enough. You're not going to hear that. Okay. So tonight I wanted to go through some stuff, and we're going to get through a good bit, at least I hope, a good bit of chapter 10. But there are some things that I found interesting that I thought you might find interesting. Well, I'm a nerd, so I think these things are interesting, so I thought you might think they're interesting. Starting with that sheet that's in front of you, we'll get to that. We'll get to that when the time comes. So where we left off in our show was we just finished chapter 9, right? So that was the whole Saul thing, right? That was the whole Saul thing on the road to Damascus, all that kind of stuff. We saw that whole thing. What we saw after that was how we shifted back to Peter, right? We shifted back to Peter. And I think that's really interesting because we saw, once we kind of got back to verse 31 of chapter 9, we kind of shifted back to Peter, right? So we were doing Saul, and then we hit 31 and we shift back to Peter. And it, like I describe it, like that cut scene in the movie where you're watching this part and then it cuts to this scene and blah, 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 while that's going on, this is going on, and blah, blah, blah. You got those cut scenes, right? So now this is a cut scene back to Peter, kind of like. And here we see that Peter is still towing the line that he had before. And what line is that?
He's preaching to the Jews.
Yeah, Jewish program, Jews talking to Jews, getting Jews to understand about Jesus Christ. He's doing that whole program. What does that program entail? How is the Holy Spirit imparted? You repent and you are baptized, and then you receive the Holy Spirit, right? So we see that is where we left off with Peter. That's where we left off with Peter. And then we switched to Saul, saw that whole conversion thing. And then we get back to Peter. So I think it's important that we kind of understand that when we left off with Peter, Peter was talking to a couple of he was kind of traveling around, kind of like Paul did after a while. Travels around, sees a few people. Aeneas, he heals some people, tells people about Jesus Christ. Tabitha, who is also called Dorcas. We see that whole thing, how that all comes about. She passed away, arise, type of thing. She gets up and all that kind of stuff, right? So we kind of go back a little bit to the program that Peter was on, right? So I think that's important for us to kind of do that. Sometimes when you see, like you're watching a TV show and then it ends, and then next week you watch that show, and at the very beginning, there's like that first 2 or 3 minutes that says previously on blah, blah, blah that you were watching. You know what I mean? MC, CSI, PDQ, whatever those initials are. There's about 20 of them. This is what happened last week, and you get to see that. Well, this is kind of that to kind of get you that frame, that mind frame. Getting back to Peter. Oh, this is what Peter's doing, and here's Peter, and he's traveling around, he's doing these things. Cool. And then you can kind of get yourself in that mindset. So I'm trying to get you into that mindset also. That was the program that he's on. Jews talking to other Jews. Why was he Jews talking to other Jews? Do you remember why that is?
Because they didn't get along with the Gentiles.
Oh, well, yeah, kind of, but
they told them to stay.
Right. So when Jesus ascended, he told them what?
Stay there.
You are going to tell, I want you to stick in Jerusalem. I want you to, what was the Great Commission? I want you to, go tell everybody about me. But I want you to start in Jerusalem, right? You need to tell Israel about me and get them on board. And then once they're on board, boop, 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 then it can go out, right? So that was kind of the idea. Get Israel on board because that was their job. That was the job that was given to him way back in the day. Remember when we know that Stephen got stoned? You know, his first thing was, you know, you stiff-necked, you know, people. He took them through a history lesson all the way back to Abram. Who was Abraham? Right? So here we see that he's carrying that forward. This is all a kind of a Jewish program. Jews talking to Jews about Jesus and all this kind of stuff. Everybody's getting there. It's a new program. But we have already seen when it came to Stephen, there was now a shift, right? There was a shift. As soon as that happened, people were flocking to Jerusalem. I'm just trying to maybe help you to paint a picture in your head, right? So the dispensation of law was still going, right? And we don't find out that Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. I mean, we can kind of see that, but Paul is the one that tells us that Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. So here we see this program, this new covenant that's come along. And this new covenant involves Jesus' death and burial and resurrection. Okay? It's still a Jewish program, still still towing that Jewish line, right? And it goes to the Jewish elite. So in that space, we saw that the 12 tribes of Israel were healed. We saw that Jews all over the place were coming from 14 or more different countries. Everybody was flocking to Jerusalem until Stephen. Once that happened, then there was a disbursement, right? There was disbursement. And the apostles still stayed in Jerusalem because that was their mandate. Stay there. Get Israel on board. All right? But Israel, being the chief priests and all that kind of stuff, weren't getting on board. Everybody else, though, scattered. And they were teaching and they were doing stuff, and that's what caused the 12 tribes to be healed and stuff like that. We saw that. But they scattered. So when that happened, we kind of had that cutscene. We cut back to Peter, and Peter's kind of traveling around a little bit because everybody's scattered. He didn't leave the Jerusalem area, too far from the Jerusalem area, because we look at, let's look at a bigger, if we see, he just kind of went in this area, okay? He didn't really leave the land of Canaan too far. He didn't really leave Jerusalem that far. He just kind of went in this area, just right around it. You know what I mean? Almost consider it like Mobile, the city of Mobile and the county of Mobile, right? So if you say, hey, I'm from Mobile, the county is a little bit bigger than the city, but you're still from the Mobile area. Think of it kind of in that context, so to speak. He traveled around a little bit within that area, kind of checking stuff out, right? And that's where we see some of these healings and some of these things that go on. Where we left Peter was that he was staying where?
With the tanner.
The tanner, right? Which was, all intents and purposes, kind of a no-no. Because a tanner is kind of not a good profession.
Dead things.
Yeah, because they're touching dead things. But in and of that piece of the puzzle, Jews would not necessarily go and stay with a tanner, nor would Jews go to visit a tanner's house. So it's very interesting that he is there in a place that maybe he shouldn't quite be, with a group of people that he maybe shouldn't quite be with, where the people he's been talking to or permission to go talk to wouldn't go to, right? It's really interesting. And the reason being is because now we're going to see that Gentiles are now getting into the program, right? Because there's a shift happening. Peter, I'll tell you, as we read through this, if you pay attention to the text, really look at the text as you begin to go through chapter 10, you can see almost the idea of a light bulb coming on with Peter. Because Peter is then, we're going to see a fantastic timing, the timing of God, perfect. We're going to see how that works out. But as it starts to unfold, you're going to see Peter kind of start putting two and two together, which he didn't do right away. But then when he starts seeing things and things start happening, I think he's starting to, okay, that, oh, right, that. And he's starting to figure out what God's trying to tell him, right? So I think that you're going to really see that. And if you pay attention to the text, I think you'll actually start to see how Peter starts to, open up his mind and be able to see what's going on. Especially with some of the verbiage that's done here. And that's what I want to do. I want to talk about some of the verbiage that's used here so that we can really understand what's unfolding. And I wanted to talk about some nerdy things too. So I really want to spend some time in this. Excuse me. I want to spend some time in this, and I really want to go through some good stuff. So I'm just telling you, I don't know how far we're going to get. So,
All right.
here we go. Chapter 10. Okay, so all this stuff happens, and now we get to chapter 10. Here we see another cutscene, right? Peter's out doing his thing. Woo, 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 woo. He's going over there, and now he's hanging out, right? Now he's hanging out at this tanner's house. Cutscene. Now we go over to Caesarville, okay? Which we also call Caesarea. Caesarea is Caesarville. Here we go to Caesarville, and there in chapter 10, verse 1, it says, there was a certain man in Caesarea, or Caesarville, called Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian regiment. Maybe you have a different word than regiment. Maybe you have you got regiment.
Band. Italian band.
Band is
Well, band
a cohort.
Italic.
Cohort sometimes is used. Regiment is probably a word that is used specifically to try and draw a picture that we would understand. Cohort is something that's used more often. The New King James kind of says regiment, just because it paints a better picture for the military that we would have today. I guess you could say cohort is a little bit more leaning into what it was like for them. Band, I think, is too general to me. But I digress. Here it says he's a centurion. It says that he is a. Oh, let me get to where I'm supposed to be, if that's possible. So the chapter is this next cutscene, or whatever you want to call it. I can't get that distinct. This next cutscene that we're going to see is two stories kind of coming together, and how God's perfect timing makes this a possibility. Because you're going to see how God is preparing two groups of people to bring about the understanding of a new dispensation, a new program that's starting, right? So here we see that, Peter's doing his thing. We leave him at the tanner's house. Then we have a cutscene over to Caesarville, all right, to Caesarea. And we see that it's going here, and we're going to see some of these preparations that are done. And you'll see a similarity that goes on here, because when Paul was on the road to Damascus, what happened to him? He got blinded, and he was told to do what?
To
Go into Damascus, and there's going to be a dude named Ananias there. He's going to come and help you out. And then while that's happening, what else happened? Ananias got a vision saying, hey, there's this dude, his name is Saul, he's going to come in, you got to go help him out. So so these two things were helping out, and you're going to see that exact same thing happen here. Okay, so Cornelius is a centurion, Now, think about it. They're not what you would consider like mercenaries. They're more like military, like Marines type of a thing. All right, some kind of modern time, you would think that these guys are soldiers, and these soldiers are from where? Italy. Okay, they're from Italy. What's in Italy? Rome, right? And the Roman Empire is in control there. So if you're in Caesarville is in the middle of Galatia, but it was built there as kind of a waypoint or a stop place, that if you can't if you're here and Rome is here, you're not getting to Rome anytime soon. You know what I'm saying? So if you want a little taste of Rome, well, you go to Caesarville, right? So here we see that there is an Italian Roman garrison there, and there is a centurion there. A centurion, as I'm flipping through this thing, a centurion is somebody of predominance. He's somebody that probably oversaw at least 100 men. He would be like a higher ranking guy that would be overseeing like 100 different men. He wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just a number. He was actually somebody, right? So here we see that there's this basically soldier base there. Here's Cornelius. He had command over that base in Caesarville. And so he was kind of a predominant person there in Caesarville. But Caesarville is still where? It's still in it's still in the area of
Jerusalem.
Yeah, Jerusalem area, right? It's still in Canaan. Man, that hurt me. It's still in that area. So there's still Jews probably all over the place, right? Just because you're in Caesarville, you go to Disneyland, you're not just going to find a bunch of mice walking around. You're going to find people from all over the place, right? So if you go to Caesarville, you're not just going to see a bunch of Romans walking around. You're going to see Jews because you're in the middle of the Jewish province. So as we read forward, keep that in your head, right? There was a certain man in Caesarea, Caesarville, called Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian regiment, a devout man, and one who feared God with all of his household, who gave alms generously to the people and prayed to God always. See, this is it would be weird, okay? It would be weird if you found a guy in Rome or in Italy that was doing stuff like this. You know what I'm saying? That'd be a little weird. But in Caesarville, in the middle of a Jewish area, that wouldn't be even though it's Roman influence, because it's Caesarville, you're not going to think it's that big of a deal because there's Jews and everything all over the place, right? So here we see that this guy is somebody special. He actually cares about, what's going on, even though he's a Gentile. He still is there. We're going to read, I will point this out to you, as we read through this, usually somebody who's a Gentile that converts over to Judaism is called what? You remember?
Judaism?
A proselyte.
Oh, yeah.
Proselyte, right? Proselyte. So, as we read through this, you're going to recognize that Cornelius isn't one of those. I really don't think he is. Here we see that he is a generous man, he prays always, and he's actually respected. We're going to see that he's respected amongst the Jewish people, right? We're going to see all those things are true, but we're going to also see as we read through some of these parts that he doesn't really know as much about the Jewish, traditions, the Jewish laws and stuff, and he doesn't actually quite understand a few of those things, but he has embraced God, okay? This is a big deal. Because this guy ain't a proselyte. This guy is just a guy who genuinely loves God and is seeking after God and wants to help people because of God. And that is a significant piece of the puzzle here. Because we're going to see the program that was going on before is what? Repent, baptize, Holy Spirit. This dude is a Gentile, not even a Jew. And he just loves God. He's not a proselyte. He doesn't really know as much as you would think, but he just loves God. And he's respected because of that. And I think that's really interesting because he's a predominant soldier amongst Caesarville, amongst Rome, basically. So
where do you think he heard about God?
Well, Caesarville's in the middle of the Jewish province. As soon as everybody scattered, I'm sure Jews passing through Caesarea probably, probably talking and all that kind of stuff. And
God was existed in the Old Testament.
yeah.
God
Well, we know that like,
yeah. It doesn't
people.
say Jesus, it said God.
Yeah, that's true. So it's saying we know that people came to the festival, the feast inside of Jerusalem. They were from like 14 or so plus different countries. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So they could have come from anywhere. But here, once everybody scattered, Caesarville, you can go there. You know what I mean? You're gonna hide out in Disneyland. Why not?
He was probably positioned there as a centurion.
Oh yeah, because it's a Roman province.
Yeah,
because it's there.
exactly.
So, but he's really buying into this concept of God. We see that he prays always. Now, there is this part which I think is really important, because he says in verse 3, about the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming in and saying to him, Cornelius. We'll see that there's bits and pieces that Cornelius does know about the Jewish faith, about God, and the Jewish faith particularly, and there's stuff that he doesn't know. So that's why I kind of question whether he was an actual proselyte or not. This part is in the pro column. He was praying in the 9th hour. Does it give you a little thing there in your little thing?
3 in the afternoon.
3 in the afternoon. Okay, 3 in the afternoon. Now, I gave you this little charty thing. I put one in here. Where did I put it? Oh, I put it right here. A little charty thing. And there's like things on the back. But so it's interesting to see how time is. Okay? It's interesting to see how time works back in the olden days in the Jewish timetable. Okay? Whenever you're talking, and this is once again another reason why this is Jewish in nature, okay? And
So sorry.
that's okay. So this is another thing why you understand that it's Jewish in nature, Jews talking to Jews and all that kind of stuff, is because it talks about the 11th hour, or not the 11th hour, it talks about the 9th hour. A little bit later, you're going to hear it talk about the 3rd hour and stuff like that. So in Roman time, we kind of, like us today, kind of follow what we would consider Roman time. Okay? The day ends when for us? Midnight. Right? And then as soon as the day ends, the new day begins. 12:01. That's the new day. Right? But for the Jews, that's different. And the Jews don't look at time as the Romans did. They only talked about the hours. Okay? And the Romans did the same thing because they didn't have, the sophisticated clocks of, a month was the moon going around and a year was that going. But they did section off their daylight into 12 sections depending on the season. And that's kind of something that you can see on the back. It's a little more visual. They sectioned off they sectioned off the day into 12 sections. So if you have the 12th hour, that's the last hour of the day before it gets dark. The Jewish the Jewish time division in the first century was as soon as it got dark, the day ended and a new day began. As soon as it got dark. Now for us, for the Roman time period, it's midnight, right? But for them, as soon as it got dark, that day ended and a new day began. Okay? That's when it happened. Instead of 12, just whenever it got dark. So whenever it got dark was a big thing. So because it gets dark at different times, right? So when it talks about the first hour of the day, it's the first hour when the sun first comes up. Because when the sun comes up to when the sun comes down, they take that day and basically divide it into 12 spots. Okay? 12 spots. And once again, it just depends on the time of the year. Because some times of the year, just like we do, some times of the year, it's lighter out longer, like during summer. During the winter, it's dark longer, right? So that's how they do that. That's how they section from the time the sun came up to the time the sun came down. They would basically formulate 12 sections. That's how the Jewish time basically worked. So to them, they would always pray and do offerings and stuff during the right hour of the day. Okay? So when the sun came up to the sun came down, you just kind of spaced it out 12 spots. Okay? So, in the third hour of the day, that's when the first sacrifices were being done. In the third hour of the day. That was like first thing in the morning. Well, not first thing in the morning. It's more like about 9 o'clock in the morning. You know what I'm saying? That's when it was. But to the Jews, that's when the first of the sacrifices were being done and the prayers were being done and all that kind of stuff, right? Priests in the first hour of the day, at the very beginning, as soon as it got daylight out, the priests were preparing everything at the temples and stuff like that. And then they would receive, on the third hour, they would receive their offerings and stuff like that. And at the third hour, the sixth hour, the ninth hour, these hours, which were basically 3 segments, were the times of prayer. Okay? So they're the times of prayer that they would follow. And it always shifted depending on like when it got bright and when it got dark, that type of thing. So when somebody refers to, so here, the reason why I tell you this is not because I'm a nerd, and it is because I'm a nerd, but whenever you see it talk about the 9th hour of the day, or the 3rd hour of the day, or the 12th hour of the day, or whatever hour of the day, that is a 1st century Jewish time division that they're talking about. So if you see that, you should automatically think in your head, they're talking Jews talking to Jews. They understand that. A Jew would talk to a Jew about that, right? Some of the stuff that you read about Paul will use that same kind of verbiage because he's a Jew. But when he talks to Gentiles, he will say midday. You know what I'm saying? Those types of things. Because it isn't always the same for Gentiles as it is for Jews. Does that make sense? So I kind of just gave that to you because it's a nerdy thing and I thought it'd be fun for you to kind of see that and maybe wrap your head around that. So whenever you see something like that, you should automatically think to yourself, maybe they're talking about a Jewish thing right here. Like maybe this is a Jewish person talking to other Jews. So that because they're using common verbiage that they would understand. Does that make sense? Okay, right on. So here we see about the 9th hour. Who's writing this? Luke. Who's he writing to? Well, he's writing to, us. But he's writing to Jewish people at the time. So he's talking about, even though it's in Greek, he's talking about this 9th hour. So here we see it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that a Jew is telling this story to other Jews, for one. But it also tells that Cornelius was following a Jewish tradition, right? He was following a Jewish tradition, all right? So he was aware of Jewish traditions and Jewish stuff, right? And he was following those things. This is a pro-proselyte, if you're making a column, pros and cons, this would be a pro one. So we see that he's familiar with these things, right? But in verse 3 it says, in about the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel from God coming in and saying to him, Cornelius. He is receiving a vision. Okay, well, he's a Gentile. That's odd. Well, before I say that, verse 3, what are the odd things that we see there? Or what are the important things that we see there? It's the 9th hour of the day. That's an important piece of the puzzle. Okay? What's another piece of the puzzle? He's a Gentile. That's an important piece of the puzzle. What's another important piece of the puzzle? An angel gave him this vision. Okay? An angel gives him this vision. All right? That's another important piece of the puzzle. And we'll talk about those things.
It doesn't necessarily say that that Cornelius was following the Jewish time period.
No.
Because it's a Jew that's telling this story.
Exactly, that's my point, is that it's a Jew talking about a Jew. So, could that mean that that's a pro for him being a proselyte? Yes and no. He's following the Jewish time periods
Well, we
to be
don't
in
know
prayer.
that he is. Whoever's
Well, we
telling
do,
the
'cause it says
story
right here.
is. Well, it says no. It's telling the story that at that certain hour. It doesn't say Cornelius said at a certain hour.
Luke is writing it. Luke
Right.
is a Jew. He's writing it to Jews.
Right.
So he would use the Jewish.
Goes to
He
that
would use the
terminology.
Jewish phrase.
It doesn't mean Cornelius did though.
Well, yeah, that's the whole preface of the thing. Here we see that in the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision that this was going on. So
But
when
Luke
he
is the
took it,
one that's telling the story though.
correct. So,
So Luke would use Jewish terminology.
correct. That's correct. Luke is a Jew talking to other Jews. But the fact that he points this piece of the puzzle out gives you the idea that Cornelius, even though he was a Gentile, was possibly following Jewish tradition.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay? So he is somebody, given the context, once again, context is everything. He feared God with all of his household.
Right.
Okay? He gave alms generously to the people and prayed to God always. Okay? Did he give alms to Jews only? No, it doesn't say that. It just says he gives, he's generous to people. Okay? He's a person that is hired to be a thug, and yet he's generous to everybody. And he prayed to God always. So right off of the heels of he prayed to God always about the 9th hour, he saw a vision. Well, what was he doing during the 9th hour? Well, the idea is that he quite possibly could have been praying during that time, right? But that's what I'm saying. It gives you the idea that he may have been following Jewish tradition, but I don't think this is enough to say that he was a proselyte, because we're going to see some other stuff that you would go, yeah, no, I don't really think he was. You know what I mean?
And
'Cause
probably
that-
not sleeping at that time of the day. No, at least he was taking a nap.
Correct, because it's
Yeah.
it's 3:00 in the
Right.
afternoon. So of course you're not sleeping in the middle of the night or something like that.
And
Okay,
you should think of a vision when you're sleeping.
right.
And that's what,
Correct. Yeah. So yes, for sure, he was doing something and he got into a vision. Hopefully not marching. Okay. So this angel comes to him and says, Cornelius, verse 4. Then he observed him and he was afraid. And he says, what is it, Lord? Verse 4. There's more to verse 4, but just in that line right there, what are the things that stand out? He observed him, so he obviously saw this vision, right? He was what?
He was afraid.
He was afraid. Okay. Once again, we see that contrast, right? When Saul saw Christ on the road to Damascus, he was afraid, and he said, "What? What is it, Lord?" And here we see that it's a little L. That's because he's talking to an angel. He observes him. So if he observes him, he obviously knows that this is not God. He observes this angel. So if God appears before you, what happens? Crazy stuff, right?
You fall down on your face and you can't see.
Yeah, exactly. So an angel comes to him, and an angel conveys this to this Gentile. He was afraid. What is it, Lord? So he said to him, your prayers and your alms have come up from a memorial before God. Now send men to Joppa and send for Simon, who is surnamed Peter. This is another piece of the puzzle right here that just reminds us a little bit about not only who's saying what and who's talking, but the shift that's going on here. Okay? Peter. Peter's got a couple of different names. Peter's also called what? Simon, right? What else is his name called?
Peter.
Cephas.
Oh, yeah.
All right? So Simon is Hebrew. Peter is Greek. Cephas is Aramaic. Okay, remember, there's a lot of people that spoke Aramaic back in the, and it's kind of going out because Greek is moving in. But Hebrew kind of faded a little, and then people started speaking Aramaic, but then Greek kind of overtook everything, right? So he has, sometimes when you see him mentioned in different parts of the Bible, it could be because of the time frame. His name is a reflection of sometimes geographic, sometimes of the time period. But here we see that he's mentioned 2 times. He's mentioned by his Hebrew name and his Greek name. Why? Well, because we're still Hebrews talking to Hebrews. So we say Simon, but we also have his surname, which is Greek, right? All before this, they didn't refer to him as Simon, right? They referred to him as Peter, which is a Greek name. And it's because this is written in Greek, and it's written to people that would read this, and the earlier audience you would only assume would be Hebrew as well. So once again, this is another piece of the puzzle. Hebrews talking to, Jews talking to Jews. Well, Jews talking to Jewish people and Greek people. Here he's talking to a broader audience once again, okay? So we see that it's starting to open up a little bit. His audience is starting to open up again a little bit, right?
Well, I got a question about
Yes.
that. In this time period, was a surname kind of like our surnames, or was it just like it's our last name is called our surname?
I think I understand what you're saying. So you had a Hebrew name,
Right.
right? And when you
But why would
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, okay?
why would his be called his surname is Peter?
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's not their original names. That's their Greek name. They actually have Hebrew names. Okay? When they were displaced, when the king, when they were taken from their land, Nebuchadnezzar. Oh man, that hurt. When they were in their land, and the Babylonians came and took everybody, the first thing that they did was rename them. That's the first thing they did. If you read the story of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you'll see that all 4 of those guys, that wasn't their original name. When they were taken from their land, the first thing that happened to them is they were all renamed. Now, I think that's a significant thing because we find out that whenever somebody gets renamed, something special happens. Okay? In the case of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, those 3 guys, Daniel also, they were pivotal in the land of that time and showing a shift from the old way of living to God's way of living, stuff like that, right? So whenever somebody's name changes, it's kind of a little significant thing. But here we see that he was given a Greek name. He had a Hebrew name. He was given a Greek name. But he also has we just know from Scripture, he also has an Aramaic name. But that name is in reference to him. If he's living in even though he is a Jew, he is living in a land that is predominantly Greek.
So it has nothing to do with who his father was then.
No.
Like our surname is.
Yeah, no.
That's
no.
my
No,
question.
it's just given to you because you've been renamed for that thing.
Okay.
It's almost like saying, well, that's probably a really bad example. If you were living here and your name was Stephen, and if you were in Mexico, your name would be Esteban, which is Stephen, right? They mean the same thing. This isn't quite like that. They're 2 different names. They don't mean the same thing. You were just renamed. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
That answers my question.
Yeah.
You know, I just.
No, but the
Because
significance.
We hear surname and think of
Yes,
glasses.
yes. He was Simon. That's who he is. But he was given the surname Peter, okay, which was Greek, okay? And he lodged with Simon. That's an interesting piece of the puzzle.
Another Simon.
He was talked about as a tanner, but it's Simon the tanner. Simon is a Greek. It comes from a Hebrew origin. So here we see that he was staying with this guy, this tanner. We see that he was staying with this tanner. Tanners are probably not cool people, and yet he went and stayed with this guy who probably has Hebrew background. He is probably just like that. So he's staying with this guy who's probably doing one of those dirty jobs. You know, you see all those dirty jobs on TV, you know, doing all that kind of stuff. He's doing that, and this guy is, you know, somebody that he's staying with. So if you look at the whole of this, the angel comes to him and he says, your prayers and your alms have come up for a memorial before God. Now send men to Joppa and send for Simon, whose surname is Peter, and he is lodged with Simon the tanner, who is the house by the sea, and he will tell you what you must do. Okay, this is the prep right here. The angel comes to him and goes, okay, here's the deal. Here's the next steps. I need you to go find this dude, Peter, and go tell him to come back with you. So, Joppa, Jerusalem, Joppa. Really close. Not very far. All right? So, Peter was, you know, going around and, you know, we see that little thing right there, that little triangle, if you're looking at that one. He just goes right there. Joppa is right there. I mean, it's right there. If you just drove your car, which you didn't have back then, if you drove your car west a little bit, you hit the water, that's basically where it's at. You know what I'm saying? So that's where he goes. Go over there, find this dude, tell him to come back with you, and he'll tell you what to do. Okay? And verse 7, and when the Lord who spoke to him had departed...
When the angel...
what did I say?
Lord.
Oh, I'm sorry. And when the angel who spoke to him had departed, Cornelius called 2 of his household servants and devout soldiers from among those... Oh, I got to scroll. Hold on. Who waited on him continually. So when he had explained all these things to them, he sent them to Joppa. We're going to see this occur a couple of times, and I think it's just a really interesting piece of the puzzle, because here we see that this Cornelius guy was a generous guy. He was in charge of hundreds of people. He was a soldier, and yet he was generous. He gave to people, and he prayed all the time. And here he grabbed people from his household, and he grabbed soldiers, and so obviously this isn't something that he just came up with. I'm sure these guys already knew who he was and knew that he was, that he loved God and those types of things. He calls these guys and he goes, hey man, I want to make sure that you are doing this. I want to make sure that you understand this, the importance of this. Here we see that this guy's a Gentile and he loves God and he's trying to live as a Gentile, not as a proselyte, but he's just a Gentile dude who knows and loves God and tries to do the best he can. You know what I'm saying? He's just trying to live right. And here we see that this angel comes to him and goes, you are doing what's right because it's right. God saw that, and that's cool. So I'll tell you what, go find this guy Peter, and and he'll tell you what to do. Okay? Because here we see that this is the groundwork for some kind of new program that's coming along, right? So as soon as that happens, Cornelius goes and he goes, hey guys, come here. Hey, you guys, come here. This is all so great. I had this vision and all this kind of stuff and blah, 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 blah. I need you guys to go grab him. And these guys, he explained all these things and he sent them off to go get this. So I think it was more of he was telling these guys what was happening, not ordering them to go do what I'm telling you to do. I think he's going and telling them these things. And I think that's the case because we're going to see these guys talk to to Peter and tell him, you know, hey, this Cornelius guy is actually a good guy. You know what I'm saying? So we'll see that in a minute. But I think it's just really interesting that here we see that he is really just this good guy, and he's filled, and God is giving him hope. You know, he was just a Gentile guy trying to do what was right, living in Caesarville, probably had no idea what he's supposed to do, right? Probably living in Caesarville, had no idea what he was supposed to do as far as the Jewish law and all that kind of stuff. And yet he was really trying to do what God wanted him to do. So here we see that he is now getting this new hope inside of him because, wow, God has recognized what I'm doing. This is awesome. So he doesn't waste any time. He grabs some dudes. Hey, go grab this guy. Okay? Is there any questions about that? Okay. Where am I at? I'm good. 9. The next day. As they went on their journey and drew near the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. There's another one there mentioned there. That's earlier in the morning. Another time of prayer. I told you once again, sometimes the housetops of places back then were kind of open, you know, type of places. It's kind of a nice place where you can go and just kind of chillax and be by yourself type of thing. So this is what he's doing. Peter went up there, the hilltop, or the housetop to pray about the 6th hour, and he became very hungry and wanted to eat. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance. So here he's talking about, oh man, I'm hungry. So the people down in the house are probably making some lunch or whatever. He goes and falls into a trance, right? I think that's really kind of cool because, you know, once again, Cornelius was given a vision about Peter. Now Peter's going to get a vision about Cornelius. And these two different individuals are going to come together at this different time, right? So he's sitting there, he's praying, he's in a trance. And then the Lord is trying, you know, is controlling his thoughts, telling him showing him what he wanted to show him and tell him what he's going to tell. And here we see this next piece of the puzzle. He's hungry, and he's thinking about eating. So God uses that thought to do an object lesson with him, which I think is awesome. Now, pay attention real quick to verse 10 and 11. Then he became very hungry and wanted to eat, but while they made ready, he fell into a trance. Verse 11, and saw heaven open up, and an object like a great sheet bound at the 4 corners descended on him and let down to the earth. Verse 12, in it were all kinds of 4-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, birds of the air, and a voice came to him, rise, Peter, kill and eat. Pause right there. Okay? What are the observations that we're seeing here?
These are probably not normally clean animals.
That is something that we'll see. Focus on not necessarily the sheet for right now or what's on it per se, but what do we see here happening?
Heaven opened up.
Heaven opened up. Okay? Heaven opened up. And in verse 13 says what?
The voice came to him.
Okay, what's significant about verse 13 in your Bible?
It's in red. So
It's in red.
Jesus speaking.
No, mine's not.
Yeah, do you have a Old King James or?
Yeah.
Yeah. So here we see that if you have a little bit more modern King James, it will be in red. Rise, Peter, kill and eat. Here we see that heaven opens up and something comes from heaven. If something comes from heaven, what is that most likely? Some kind of obvious direction, right? I mean, if it's coming from heaven, obviously it's coming from God. And it's something that God is instructing or educating or doing, right? So he saw heaven open up, and in verse 13, a voice came to him, and it's in red. It says, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." I think this is really a big, important piece of the puzzle, but let me put it on hold for a second here. Let's look at the sheet real quick, and then we'll get back to that. He saw heaven open up, and an object like a great sheet bound at four corners. I think that's interesting, bound at four corners. Where have we, in our previous study, saw the four corners?
Revelation.
In Revelation. Remember, the four angels stood at the four corners and directed all of mankind. Well, it's interesting because we see this kind of visual. Again, we see that heaven opened up and an object of the great sheet bound at all four corners. Four corners, right? So we see this is coming from heaven, and because it's bound at four corners, it gives you the idea that this is something for all of mankind. This isn't just for, one or two people, or one group of people like the Jews over the Gentiles. It's coming from, from heaven as a direct command from heaven, and it's bound at all four corners, meaning it's for mankind. Okay? So I think that's really interesting because he's seeing this, but it's not registering. It won't register for a little bit. But we see that this is what's coming here. And it descends to him, and it lets down to the earth. All right? So I think the sheet that's bound at four corners, I really think that that's a significant piece of the puzzle because I think it's really kind of an interesting thing. It's for all of mankind. It's covering the earth. It comes down to the earth as if it's something for everyone. Verse 12, and there is all kinds of four-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, birds of the air. That's the part where if there's everything on there, there's got to be clean and unclean animals, especially from his reaction that he gives us in verse 14. I've never eaten any of that kind of stuff, you know what I mean? Because, back in Leviticus, chapter 10 or 11, it tells me not to eat that stuff, you know what I mean? So I would never eat that stuff, right? But here we see that there are all kinds of four-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, birds of the air. All right? So this sheet is instructing mankind that this stuff is okay now. It's different now. Before, you couldn't do it, but now you can. It's okay. How do I know? Because it came from heaven, right? It came from heaven for all mankind, and he's saying, it's okay. And it's given by direct revelation by Christ himself. How do we know it's from Christ himself? Well, Cornelius was visited. He got his vision from where?
An angel.
An angel, right? When Peter gets his direction, what is the definition of an apostle?
You have to see Christ.
You were given a direct revelation or a direct instruction by Christ himself. All right? Cornelius was visited by an angel, right? So here we see that an angel comes to Cornelius, this Gentile. Here's this, right? But here we see that Christ himself has come to him. Peter's an apostle. He's someone that's committed and was to Jesus himself, and he received instruction from Christ himself. In verse 14, if you look at verse 14, he says, "But Peter said, 'Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean.'" This is his reaction from Christ's direction. But in his reaction, it kind of gives us a little bit of an understanding. He says, "Not so, Lord." Okay? That word Lord is capitalized, right? That word Lord is capitalized. Why is that word capitalized? Well, when Cornelius saw, let me get to that part right there. When Cornelius saw the angel, he said, "What do you want, Lord?" Lowercase l. He beheld.
I have a
Uppercase.
uppercase in ours.
I do too.
You don't?
We do.
on the
Capital.
first one, but
Oh,
Cornelius.
really?
Yeah.
Yes.
Ah, that's something else right there. So no, he says, "What do you want, Lord?" He's identifying him as some kind of person of authority because he can see him as an angel, right? So he can see him as, "What would you like, Lord?" But here we see that it is not that it is a capital L. All right, because it is giving a direction of this particular type of authority. That word Lord in the Greek was a word used specifically for a title given to the Messiah. Okay, a title given to the Messiah. Okay, and if you skip forward a little bit to verse 36, which we'll just do to cheat real quick. If you skip forward to verse 36. If I can get there myself, it says, I passed it by right there, but in every nation, whoever fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him. The word which God sent to his children of Israel, preach peace through Jesus Christ. He is Lord, same word, of all. Okay? So here we see that he is identifying him as Lord. He being an apostle, would recognize who this is. Once again, think back to our eschatological study. When John was watching the throne room scene going on, and the angels were, when God was holding that scroll, right? And the angels were going, no, nobody has the ability to open the scroll. And who shows up? Jesus shows up. This guy's got the authority to open the scroll. John recognized him. Why? Well, it's John. John's seen this dude. He's seen him transfigure right in front of his face. Who else saw that? Peter. Peter was there. Peter and John saw him transfigure himself on the mountain right there in front of their face. Right? So here, I think it's really interesting because it says here, he calls him Lord, and he's talking to him, and he says, Lord, I've never done anything like that. And it continues on in verse 15, it says, a voice spoke to him again a second time. What God has mine says cleansed, it could be declared clean, depending on your thing, you must not call common. Verse 16, this was done 3 times. The object was taken up into heaven again. What else happened to Peter 3 times? What happened to him 3 times?
Denied Christ.
He denied Christ. And who told him that was going to happen?
Jesus did.
Okay, so here we see that the reason why it's in red lettering is given the context, given what's being spoken about, given everything that we know about Scripture already, it seems painfully obvious that Christ himself is giving this because he's an apostle. He knows who is speaking to him. He refers to him as Lord. He refers to, he does this 3 times. What is 3 once again? The number 3? Like completeness, perfection, you know what I mean? That type of a thing. So here he does that 3 times, and he says this 3 times, right? And then once he does that, the object is taken away into heaven. Verse 17, you'll see that Peter doesn't quite understand what that means, but we'll get to that in a minute. But here we see that it happens 3 times. So that means completeness. It means perfection. And here he's getting this message. And God wanted to make sure, Christ wanted to make sure that he was getting this message clearly. So he told it to him 3 times. All right? So I just think it's really interesting that it tells you a voice, but then it's in red lettering. So if you look at the context, you look at everything that's being said, you look at what's being done, it seems obvious that's why they translated this into red lettering for Christ himself. All right? So here we are with this new kind of, this new order of business is coming down. Of course, Peter responds as any Jew would. In verse 14, well, I've never eaten any of that stuff. And he says, I've never eaten anything common or unclean. I've never done any of that. You know what I mean? But that's when in verse 15, he is told the second time what God has cleansed or what God has made clean. Does anybody else have a different thing?
Just made clean.
Made clean, right? Made clean, you must not call common. All right? So here we see that there is definitely something that is clean and unclean. We've known that. We've seen that since the very beginning, that there's a scenario where there's clean and unclean. But common, that's a little different, right? We know from some of our dispensational study that there were certain animals that were used in sacrifices, you know what I mean? And it was usually determined by the priest, and it was usually determined by what you did.
What the sin was.
Yeah, what the sin
How
was.
severe.
And also by your economics, situation. You know what I mean? If you had money, go get yourself a goat or go get yourself a calf. If you were poor, go get yourself a turtle dove. You know what I mean? Go get something a little bit less. You know what I mean? Whether that's fair or not. But here we see that that type of a thing. That was all kind of there. But common is something. I think, me personally, I think that's a little more subjective. Like, they look at these things that are not supposed to be eaten, like pigs that have split hooves and stuff like this, as common animals. They're not clean animals. You know what I mean? So they recognize it as clean. Well, here, Christ corrects him. Anything that I declare clean isn't common. Okay? And that piece of the puzzle is really important there, because not only is he correcting him, this is going to be okay. These animals, I've declared that they're going to be okay, but you need to not look at those things as if they are common. They're not common anymore. They are something that can be utilized, right? And we're going to see that important piece of the puzzle, because later on in verse 28, I think, he's talking to Cornelius, and he's talking to these people, and he's talking to these Gentiles. And the idea that the Jews had about the Gentiles is that the Gentiles were common. They were common, barbarian, nasty people that we don't talk to. But here I've declared them clean, so there isn't such thing as something common, right? So we're going to see that unfold. But I thought it was interesting that we look at that. I thought, because it's red lettered, I thought it would be interesting just so you guys had an opportunity to kind of look at that, see what that looked like. Yes.
I thought too that one of the reasons that those animals were off the chart as far as being able to eat them and that kind of thing,
Right.
was that they had a tendency to spoil real quick. And
They did.
They could.
A lot of that.
Make them sick.
Yeah, a lot of it was medicinal. That was one of the reasons why you're not supposed to be around dead things. Why you're, like pork, for example. If you cook pork, if you cook pork and eat it right away, well, it's not so bad. But if you don't cook it all the way through, or if you try and keep it for a day or two, it's not going to last. You know what I mean? You get sick from that real easy.
Mhm.
And yes, a lot of that has to do with medicinal stuff, for sure. You know what I mean? But it was something that was given to them in that sense.
Yeah.
But now he's saying, nah, this is going to be cool. You can do whatever you got to do. I think those things, once again, were shown as an educational tool for us to look at things. In the beginning, the biggest educational tool that they had to wrap their heads around was murder. I mean, they wanted to murder people all the time. Cain said, I killed Abel. If people find out, they're going to kill me. No, I'll protect you. Murder, when it gets into human government, that was a big thing too. You need to make sure that you don't murder people. It was a big, that was like a big thing. Medicinal things started popping up and stuff like that. Samson took the vow of the Nazarite. He was born into the vow of the Nazarite. One of the big things is you don't go around dead things, but he went and killed like a couple thousand Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. we know that the riddle that he had was based off of a beehive that was actually made in the carcass of a dead lion. So, you know, he obviously went near dead things and stuff like that, breaking that, you know, that cardinal rule, so to speak. So there is a lot of medicinal stuff in there. But here we're seeing that now, you guys, nothing is seen as common. And I think that's the big thrust of this, is nothing is common anymore. You got to break the way you're looking at things. You got to stop looking at things the way you've been looking at it. But to their, I mean, to their credit, or not credit, but to their point, they've been living this way for like 1,500 years. So, I mean, you know, you got to kind of try and work it in there a little bit, you know. So here he's trying to get them to understand that something new is happening. And he tells them 3 different times, and then he takes it up to heaven. And if you look at verse 17, now while Peter wondered within himself what this vision, which he had seen, meant, okay, he's sitting there thinking to himself, okay, what does that mean? Like, I can eat that stuff now? Or what does that look like now? Or pretty soon he's going to find out this has nothing to do with lunch. He's got lunch on the brain because he was hungry, right? But a little bit later, when he's talking to Cornelius and his whole household and a whole bunch of people, he's talking to a whole room of Gentiles, he's going to now realize, he's going to start putting 2 and 2 together and realize, nah, this wasn't about lunch. This is about things not being common. God has now declared them clean, so they're no longer seen as common. So we got to kind of wrap your head around that and kind of tuck that away in your mental Rolodex, because when we start reading that part, you'll go, okay, I get it. As Peter did. Peter didn't get it then, right now, anyway. He didn't get it right now. But he will. And I think it's awesome. Once again, we're almost out of time, but I think it's awesome in verse 17. While Peter, think about this, right? While Peter is wondering within himself about the vision of which he had seen, meant, behold, the men who had been sent from Cornelius had made inquiry of Simon's house and stood before the gate. Okay, just imagine God's timing, baby. Here we see that, you know, Peter goes to this tanner's house. He's sitting there, and he's placed in a position where Gentiles would feel free to come and visit him or go and look for him. He's there. He's now having this dream. He's having this vision, and he's having this vision about things that are not supposed to be looked at, looked down upon or looked at as common anymore. And while that whole thing's going on, there was something all the way over in a whole other place, in Caesarea, right? So if we're looking at the map, Joppa, Caesarea. So they're both right along the water, but Caesarea is up north of that water. So here we see that he's up there, and he's thinking about this, he's thinking about this stuff, down there. And then these guys had, Cornelius had this vision. He turns around and sends guys to go get them. And as he's going over there traveling, he's having his vision. And while he's figuring out what that means, that's when these guys come knocking at his door. Think of the timing that takes, right? The timing that takes. And the reason why that timing is so important is because while he's trying to figure out what that means, God's answering his thoughts. What is this supposed to mean? Hey, is Peter home? Can he come out and play? Okay. So once he starts seeing these things unfold, then he starts, the light bulb comes on, he starts putting 2 and 2 together, and he starts realizing that something just changed, something just happened, right? So that's kind of a cool piece of the puzzle about how God works stuff out, how his timing is perfect, how he's doing all these kinds of things. It's really, really awesome, right? It's really, really awesome how God works these things out, as God would, of course. Verse 18, and they called and asked whether Simon, whose surname was Peter, was lodged there. while Peter thought about the vision, the Spirit said to him, okay, once again, what are we looking at here? The Spirit, okay? The word he, which is a definite article, and Spirit, the word that we use for a spirit. So is it a spirit, like an angel, or some kind of, speaking thing? No, it is the Spirit. Okay? So Christ himself, so heaven opened up. What is heaven a representation of? God himself comes down, Christ speaks to him, rise, go kill, eat, don't declare things common that I'm going to say are clean. And then the Spirit comes to him, which he has, and indwelled in him, and the Spirit says, dude, it's okay. Go ahead and go with these guys. Right? So here we see that it isn't just Christ that's doing this. It's all of the Godhead is now participating in this, making sure that Peter understands that there is a transition going on here, that something's changing, so that they can see this. Peter thought about the vision, and the Spirit said to him, behold, 3 men are seeking you. Arise, therefore, go down and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them. Doubting nothing. Why does he have to tell him, doubting nothing? Well, he's just sitting there. He just got that vision, and he's going, dude, I wonder what that means. And then all of a sudden, hey, is Peter here? The Spirit goes, hey, these guys are here for you. Just don't worry about it. Just go. You'll figure it out. I think that's so awesome. And that's actually kind of telling for us in the 21st century, not just in the first century. When God comes to us and, hey, God's here, he's not saying, hey, I want you to understand what I'm going to be doing here. He says, get up and go. Don't worry about it. You'll understand eventually, but you don't need to understand right now. All you got to do is be willing to go. And that's what he does here. Peter was thinking about this vision, and the Spirit said, don't worry about it. Don't doubt it. Don't worry about it. Just go with them. Okay? Just go with them.
Then
And
you have the faith and obedience against
right, he has the faith and obedience. Once again, we see here that there's a difference between, when Paul was called, or when Saul was called, he's like, who is this, Lord? Because he's hearing this booming voice and can't see. But when Ananias was called, he was like, I'm here. Where do you want me to go? You know what I mean? Here we're kind of seeing the same thing as when an angel appears before Cornelius, he's like, who is this? And then here, Peter, he says, just go with them. Just go with them. You don't need to worry about that. God's directing him specifically and telling him to go. And he's like, all right, I'm out. Because in verse 21, Peter went down went down to the men who had been sent for him from Cornelius and said, yes, I am he whom you seek. For what reason have you come? And then he says, and then this is when these guys go, hey man, we're from Cornelius and we're here to take you to him. Okay. You know what I mean? So here's this, this is kind of that same kind of scene that we saw earlier with the two different, contexts of a guy that's truly in tune with God versus a guy that's, thinks he's in tune with God, right? Cornelius, was he a proselyte? I don't think so, because he was loving God and he's living for God, but he wasn't like in tune like that. Not like Peter was. Not like Ananias was. That type of thing. They were just like, I'm here. I'm ready. What's up? Type of a thing. So I think that's really interesting and a really good contrast of things to get to understand. We are out of time. Does anybody have any thoughts, comments, questions?
Did you finish 22?
No, I didn't even
Okay.
read 22.
I was assuming that was where you were going to stop.
Yeah. I haven't even read 22.
Okay, that's fine.
But
21's good.
yeah. So I mean, we'll start right there. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments or questions, observations?
I think that reminds us too that when God's working on someone else's heart, they're working on yours too. Different things are going on at the same time, but, you know, sometimes you don't know it until later.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories, or object lessons, I guess you could say, my favorite in the Bible, is when people are pressing Jesus about how, oh, well, you guys think that you're so special, and you guys aren't paying your temple taxes and stuff like that, because Jesus was mad about them using, you know, his father's temple to do bad things. And he says, you guys are enough. Well, you guys think you're special and you're not following the law by paying your taxes. He says, all right, fine, whatever. So he goes and tells one of his guys, who a lot of them are fishermen, go in there, go catch a fish, and inside the fish is going to be money. And you take that money and go pay for our temple taxes. So the guy goes out there and pulls them in. Sure enough, there's a fish with money in it. He goes and does that. I mean, you know, how those kinds of fish that were in that thing. You know, if you've ever seen Finding Nemo, you know that there's those fish with a big mouth, and they the fish will lay their eggs. The female will lay their eggs, and the male will come and scoop all those eggs into his mouth and keep those eggs there until they hatch, right? And when it hatches, he lets the eggs out and they swim around. Well, of course, those eggs, those little things don't want to be out there. They want to get back into the warm, cool place that's in his mouth. So you know what the fish does? The fish goes down and it'll swim down and it'll pick up a rock and keep the rock in its mouth. So sometimes if the fish try and, the little guys try and get in, bing, 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 they hit the rock. Just imagine fish like shiny things. So somebody on a boat somewhere probably had, a denarius sitting there, and he was messing around with it. Accidentally dropped it in the water. The water goes, it falls down to the bottom of the sea. This fish over here spits out all these things, and he swims over here to go put something in his mouth. He sees the shiny thing, he puts it in his mouth. He's got it in his mouth, and he's swimming around. All of a sudden, a fish hook comes down, catches him, and he takes his sling out, and he goes and pays it. How do you know that that's going to happen? Easy. You're God. So, you know what I'm saying? So here, I love the timing of God. I love how he brings all this stuff together. I love how he formulates all this thing. He works it all out. And as the thought bubble is still hanging over his head, guys are, hey man, I'm here for you. And okay, what's happening? Just go with these guys. It's going to work. I just think it's awesome. Any other thoughts, comments, questions, observations? No? Yeah? I didn't say to sit there and Okay, let's pray. I've lost everybody already because they're doing whatever.
You lost me at Finding Nemo.
I know, Finding Nemo!
Because I haven't seen it.
Oh, you haven't seen Finding Nemo? Oh.
Tyler was grown by then. So.
Yeah. I was too, but I had kids, so dear Lord, thanks so much for this opportunity we have to look at your word and to just kind of appreciate what it has to tell us and try and put ourselves in the audience of what it was back then, but also see how that is important for us today as we look at these scriptures and understand that there's a change going on in the administration of how you deal with mankind and how that folds into the dispensation of the grace of God, this wonderful mystery that you had, that you prepared for us and to live in today, which gives us the ability to be adopted into your family, to have residency in heaven. It's a magnificent thing. And it all shifted in this place as it was meant to be for you. Dear Lord, I look at your scripture, I see all the little nuances of things that happen, all the little things, and I'm just in awe of how these things work out because you make them work out. You fold things together. Your sovereignty is absolute. So dear Lord, help us to truly appreciate the studies that we do, appreciate all that you do, all that you work out, all that you provide, and just keep that in our hearts as true hope of the future, and knowing that you've made us part of your plan and purpose, and we are so thankful. Bless this time. Help us to take this study and just really think about it, and just honor you in the life that we live in it. And we are thankful for all those who are here. Bless those who hear it, and those who maybe are watching. And we ask all these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen.